Hello, this is a recording of our Meetup group where we discussed whether it's better to launch a medical device in Europe or in the USA. In this session, we have Judith de Wilde, Doorn, and Amit Relia. We will look at the costs, the speed, and the chance of success of getting your device on the market. I hope you learned something interesting today, and I hope to see you at one of our next meetups. You can sign up using the link in the description below. Enjoy.
As mentioned, today we're going to talk about the US or European market preference. And as a start, I would like to say when we speak about the European market, of course, more formal comment, we mean the union territory, because under the MDR, Europe is not really a thing. And you would be surprised how many times we still see this going wrong on a daily basis here. In contract saying that it's a Europe territory, but it's a union territory. And the union is bigger than Europe. It includes all 27 member states, but also Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, for those who are interested, and also Turkey. So this is just as a formal start, so to say. Then a little bit about me. My name is Judith de Wilde. As I mentioned, I work as a lawyer here at Axon Lawyers. This is my fourth year here. And we, as a firm, really specialize in life sciences. For me, this means I deal with the MDR and IVDR on a daily basis. But we also do a pharmaceutical law. We have a food team, so novel foods, and, well, all other aspects of the life sciences industry. So when I speak to other attorneys and they hear you are working in life sciences, you see so much just confusion, but I think it's a really, really interesting area to work in. Today we will talk about timelines, costs, expected success rate, which is of course very like a tricky area to say how much success you will be having or not. And I will at the end also share some general market preference considerations just for you to keep in the back of your mind. As a disclaimer, of course, I'm an attorney, so I sometimes use disclaimers because it's safe. My professional qualification is limited to the EU, so actually only to the Netherlands, but we have clients worldwide, and that's why we can do this presentation also from a bit of a helicopter view. But strictly seen, we are, or I am only admitted to the Dutch bar, and we mainly advise about European law. So not about FDA rules, so to say. We do have quite some US-based clients, but of course, as soon as the jurisdiction shifts, we send them over to our American friends and vice versa. First, I would like to take you along with this general comparison. And for some, this might be really just kicking in some doors. But for those who don't know, I think this is really just the very obvious things you would need to know when deciding whether you want to enter the US market first or the European market. I will say European market, not union market, because it's just not the way people speak, so I will use just Europe for that. I think the most striking difference, of course, is the fact that the US has a centralized system, of course, and Europe has not. We have a notified body system here. This can be either to your advantage or disadvantage, as you are able to choose your own notified body. So you can do some window shopping and then at the end see where you want to be at. Although with capacity problems, it's a little bit different these days, but it could either be an upside or a downside for you. So that's really, I think, the most striking difference. Another very obvious one is, of course, the FDA. Everybody in the US speaks English, although here in the Netherlands and in Europe, everybody within the union speaks its own language, probably as a native. So we do have some language barriers here and there. And also that counts not only for the languages, but also for the national laws, of course, that apply. Besides that, the union market obviously is in transition. I think you are all aware of that, whereas the FDA market is, or the US market is not as much in transition. So chaos is here. And of course, that's also one of the reasons this meetup will discuss this topic, of course. The third one would be, or the fourth one would be validity of approval. In the US, once you have been granted your FDA approval, or FDA, I think it grants it, it doesn't approve, it is valid until further notice, I would say. Please correct me for the other speakers if I'm wrong, but here in Europe, your CE certificate will have a validity of only 5 years, after which you will have to do a reassessment. So that's a big change, or a big difference, I would say. However, the CE mark is very widely accepted in the world. So if you are planning to go to certain countries after Europe or after the US, it might make sense to take a good look at that as well. Also, having an FDA approval in your pocket is really nice to have, and will also, I think, impact your market access in different parts of the world as well. But I feel like it's not as strong as the CE mark. But we can debate maybe later about that topic. Last one, I would say the US mark is obviously the bigger market in terms of value. I'm not sure how much bigger it exactly is, the medical devices market. But I've seen figures of being even twice the size. In terms of market growth, I would say the European market is supposed to have been growing the last years more and more, but the growth is expected to be bigger in the US the coming years. I believe from this year to 2028, the US market is expected to grow more. Also, if somebody has questions, you can save them until the end, but you can also just break in. I wouldn't really mind, to be honest. Timelines. First one. Starting with Europe MDR timelines. Of course, I think most of you will know they are currently long, uncertain, but most of all, they are just unknown. If you are trying to look up an overview of even targeted timelines, let alone actual timelines, you really won't find any, because it's not transparent at all. Expedited routes are sometimes possible. Those are a bit shorter, but not all notified bodies offer such a service. And also, if offered, you should take into account that these routes are much, much more expensive. And also, speed really is relative. So you are done maybe in like 9 to 11 or 9 to 12 months, rather than a year and a half maybe. So to say that it's really very quick, no, I wouldn't dare saying that. Timelines, another important factor is the notified body of choice. As I mentioned, in Europe, you are free to choose your own notified body. And of course, it really depends how good your notified body is, or how your collaboration is when it comes to speed. And this is also a bit of luck, but I would really advise to look closely at which notified body to go with. Also, it's good to know that not all notified bodies are accredited for softwares as medical devices. So I have made a link here in the presentation that you might, I think, receive afterwards, or not, I don't know, to the NANDO database. This is a European Commission database in which you can find all the notified bodies and all the notified bodies that are accredited for software. So you can just do some research there. And also know where you want to go and start window shopping, for example. I know examples of software specialized notified bodies, such as SGS Fimco. This is a Finnish one. I know there's Scarlet in the Netherlands. That's, I think, relatively new. Intertech is quite a known one in Sweden. And I and this is more from a personal experience. Here we have had quite some clients in the office that had software devices, and they had quite some trouble with ECM in Italy. So I don't want to make any enemies there in Italy, but we really had quite some trouble with ECM for more than one client. As I said, however, once you do obtain CE certification, which might take longer, then it will be easier to have market access, for example, in the UK and Switzerland, who are having a automatic recognition, but also will be eligible for short tracks in Saudi Arabia, Australia, Argentina, Singapore, China, and more. So, as I said, it's worth taking a look at that. And see also which way your company wants to go after making this first decision. I did manage to find a timeline of like real-time, how do you say that, timelines for certification of not only the QMS but also product certification. And these are the timelines from, I think this is published in October 2023. So they're not as accurate, but I do have the feeling that they didn't get any shorter. Maybe even the opposite. I feel like they are maybe even longer than this currently. And as you can see, you should look at the blue graph. The most common timeline to get fully CE certified is 13 to 18 months, which is very, very long, of course. This is from a European Commission survey. Then the targeted timelines, as I said, for notified bodies, this doesn't even exist, and this can be really frustrating, but it's really up to the notified body how they manage their own process. Expedited routes, as I said, if possible, can be around 55 weeks. This is one I saw from TÜV Süd. So this is quicker, but still, please don't think you will be extremely fast. For FDA timelines, these are the targeted timelines I found online. But also, please do keep in mind that also the FDA doesn't always manage to make their own deadlines. I do think it's very safe to say, and this will not be, I think, a surprise for you, that in general, the US streak seems faster or even much faster. So our experience here is that due to this difference in timelines, companies do tend to really at least seriously look at the option of going to the US first. This is a very difficult one. I think more difficult than timelines, because the amount that needs to be spent for you to get certified will, either here or in the US, will depend on the classification of your device, but it will also depend on the required clinical evidence, and will also depend on which route you will taking with the FDA. So this is a bit of a difficult comparison at times. In general, I think it's safe to say that proving equivalence for a 510K is easier than obtaining certification under the MDR. For a 510K, you would need to prove that there's a equivalent product on the market already, approved and all. So this is, I think, one of the shorter routes to go for FDA. So if you are eligible for that, great. And I think many software devices could be a 510K. If you go for other FDA routes, so pre-market approval or de novo routes, substantial clinical evidence is required, as well as here in Europe. So I think it might still be faster in cases, but the difference, I feel, won't be as big as with a 510K. And then when we are talking about money, of course, gathering your clinical evidence plays a huge role. I feel, but maybe this is also good for the panel discussion, in our experience here at the office, I would say that clinical investigations in the US are more expensive and sometimes also more of a hassle to get arranged. Although in Europe, we have the investigated-initiated studies, which really helps, I think, a lot for companies that could go that route here, and are sometimes perceived as easier. However, it is possible to gather your clinical evidence here in Europe and then use it for your FDA application as well. Well, this is what I meant. This is very transparent and admiring simple overview of fees. So there's fees for small businesses, which is really nice, of course. And there is standard fees. And as I mentioned, you can just see for all routes and supplements what is expected of you cost-wise. And this, I think you've already seen, but this comes on top of the annual fee of $7,000. So you should add that as well. You can just find it very easily online. For notified bodies, as I said, such an overview does just not exist. I think notified bodies also tend to charge per hour, which may make it more uncertain what the total amount will be in the end. So of course it can be less, but I think there's a really big really a chance that it's in the end more. And also the uncertainty is, of course, for smaller companies far from ideal. You see the slide? I think so, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe a comment from the slide before. So in FDA, the pre-market, the pre-subs are free.
Yeah. I'll continue. Let's see what here it is. Then expected success rates, and this is really where we get on thin ice, especially as an attorney. I don't like to do promises that I can't really keep. So instead of saying it depends, I here listed three, I think, factors that are really most important for your success rate. So the design of your medical software, of course, like if it's shit, so to say, people will see, people will tell. The quality of your clinical evidence, also huge factor, and also the quality of your regulatory files, of course. And this sounds really, really simple and logic and maybe even unsatisfying, but we can't sometimes make it better than that. The expertise and preparation of the manufacturer, I feel, is the main factor when it comes to success. Either if you are going for market access here in the Union or in the US. So know what you are doing. And I also know from my previous work experience in a medical device software startup, this is also often where it might lack. So I would say if you plan on going to go for a market entrance, of course, everybody's planning, really know, well, ensure that you have the right knowledge at hand. And I also know that is a costly business sometimes, but I do feel it's really worth it, because trying without giving it all is, of course, it's, in my experience, doomed to fail, because it is so complex and it is very overwhelming. So just make sure you have great guidance. In our experience, when it comes to reviews, the FDA takes a very in-depth look of the device at hand, while notified bodies, and I don't know if I will upset somebody by saying this, but I feel sometimes they have more of a tick-the-box mentality, or to put it nicely, they have more of a formal approach. So they check if you have done everything, if you have done all the requirements well. So this could also be in your advantage as a company if you are knowing what you're doing and knowing which boxes to tick. But as I said, that's for especially smaller companies not always the case. This is a slide or a graph I found also in the European Commission survey. Just for your background knowledge, is the reasons for refusal. You might have seen it, but I think it's nice to be aware before going for any market entrance to really do your homework on things like this. As you see here in June, which is well, they're all kind of blue greenish, but the bottom it says the main reason for refusal is the fact that the application is outside of the scope of the notified body's designation, and this I feel should really not happen. You can look it up, you can do your homework, and of course you can go wrong on classification and all of that, but I would say really this is a beginner's mistake. Wrong qualification of the product or classification of the device also is quite a big one, but I do feel I have more mercy for that because I know the classification rules can also be multi-interpretable over here. So yeah, application not complete is also very often the case. So yeah, this is really part of standard homework for either market, I would say, when speaking about success rates. Then this one, I found this really interesting. It's an article that did some comparative research here between certification here in Europe and getting US market approval. Here you can see the cost of assessment and the duration of the assessment. And I do have to say this is not for software because I couldn't find anything that was done similarly for software. This is for patriotic cardiology devices. I know that's very different, but I still found the differences here for this type of device. I found it very, very striking. It took way longer, also due to the fact that it had a US 30-day review under a special 510K, which is of course quicker than light can light can travel here. This is like bizarre timelines for Europe, but also the costs are in the end much higher for the MDR. Also keeping in mind that you have to recertify every 5 years. And also Health Canada is also taken in account here. Then this will be my last slide. I wrote down some market preference considerations. And again, this could really be kicking in open doors. But if you haven't considered it yet, I think you should know. So that's why I put it here in the meetup for you all to be aware of. One thing that comes to mind for me first is there an investor preference? If of course that is the case, but I can imagine your company has European-based investors, which would be more fond of seeing the device on the European market or something. Of course, they would like to see money as well. I'm aware of that, but could be the case. Also, the fact that they or your company might be unfamiliar with the US regulatory system could also really be something to consider. So it doesn't mean it should be a no then for you, but I do think you should look at your own blind spots and do something about it. So find some guidance. Another one, I already mentioned it actually, but find a software specialized notified body, and also of course check capacity, because this can be a day of night difference for you. So not only one that's specialized, but also preferably one that you have heard that has been doing well in these kinds of things and understands software. Also, one thing to note, the FDA is also the supervisory authority. So this is for after your market approval. If something goes wrong, it's the same FDA on your doorstep and they probably know all about you. Whereas in Europe, this is a bit different because we have a more layered system. Notified bodies are not the one enforcing on you in case issues occur. So do with it what you like, but I think it's quite a big difference. Then, as I said, know your classification rules or know the classification of your device. If it's high risk or not, is it eligible for 510K or not, which is the one below I mentioned there. It's just a very different stories, and you don't want to compare apple to pears. And the last one, your regulatory strategy should be aligned with your market strategy, and this makes all sense. But if it's not, it would be such a waste for you. So imagine you also want to go to the UK very badly, or you want to go to a country that has a very nice fast track for CE mark devices, for example, Australia, because that market is for some reason very important to you. Keep that in mind as well, because it can be saving time and money in the end.
We have a couple of questions we would like to start with. First, as you can see on the screen, what are the different pathways to register a software medical device, mainly in the EU and in the USA? So I don't know who would talk about what, but please go ahead.
So what I did, I just put down basically the really quick summary of what Judith was saying. And if you guys have anything to comment or discuss, go ahead.
Yeah, I saw in the chat some questions about the AI models cannot be a 510K remark. I think that's good to take along in this discussion. This is what I heard. As I said, I haven't been there myself, so I'm curious to see the other panelists' view on this. But since the 510K should prove equivalence to a device already on the market, I feel having an AI model that will be difficult because they're all different.
Yeah, so
they cannot be the same, right?
I think Amit and I can both probably extensively comment on this. I'll give it a shot. So there's a lot of 510Ks already cleared with AI models, so it's clearly an acceptable route. Also,
well, my bad then for the scare.
Yeah, no worries. But there are some caveats clearly, which is it depends on the type of device and the kind of claim that you attach to the device. So you have in the view of the FDA, there's very low level claims. For example, if you look at healthy tissue and you use your AI to look at healthy tissue, it enters up in a generally low classification. For example, under the LOZ code in radiology, where you are just a viewer and you would, for example, segment simple tissue, and then it would follow the standard 510K route, which is pretty low bar compared to the other routes. I think if you go into one level higher, for example, where you have an AI system or a software system that actually detects something that is abnormal, then you would have to be subjected to more rules. Usually then the 510K route would also define special controls on top of the basic 510K, which can include clinical requirements. For example, the type of device we had at Aidens, we would need to do a reader study. So to your point, Judith, you compare the items that are equivalent to the previous device, but since AI is so specific and it's trained, validated on different data, that route actually demands that you do a clinical study on top to demonstrate exactly that your AI model is good for your specific intended use. And such a reader study is insane. I found that a very horrible route. If anyone is interested, I can come on more, but we've had a very, very lengthy discussion with the FDA, and it took us a very long time to actually get to a point where the FDA agreed on our protocol. Then we did our study, and then finally FDA turned around and said that they no longer agree with what they agreed with us in the pre-sub, which was a super painful moment. And then obviously there are devices where there's no previous cleared 510K, and then what you do is you go to the FDA, you ask with a de novo, and the FDA will go with you through the de novo process and work with the manufacturer to determine whether eventually it's going to be a class 2 or class 3 product. A lot of the software de novos actually tend to end up in the class 2 product, very limited going to class 3, but it's not excluded that it actually ends up in class 3. And there's still a number of devices, mainly the actual diagnostic software tools, so something that actually would state this is a type of cancer. For example, they usually end up, and I'm not saying this is exclusive, it can still go either ways, but these would end up in the class 3 route, which would be the most difficult route, which would be a pre-market approval, where you are demanded to have clinical data and you go through a process with the FDA to determine what kind of study you will need to execute to determine the effectiveness of the device and to bring it onto the market. I hope that gives a little bit of insight. Another interesting one that might be interested for some companies.
Let's go to Amit, see if it
Yeah,
covers. Because we're trying to cover like 5 minutes per question.
I agree with what Leon is saying. Just the fact that your product is an AI SaMD, it doesn't preclude you from 510K if a predicate device is available. That predicate device could be your own predicate device. When you retrain your database and you add more performance specifications or more indications, that's also a 510K. So that doesn't preclude you.
Lara?
All right. So can we move to the next question, please? All right. What are the steps and timelines to each one for the EU and the US? I know it's a bit complicated. It depends also on the classification of the device, so forth. And how certain are the timelines? I think in the presentation, we touched base on certain things. If you have any comments or any corrections and so forth from Leon and Amit, please go ahead. Otherwise, we can move to the next question.
I can take the US timelines. So the timelines published by the FDA are what they have to report to Congress, but they have a little bit of a leeway in there. So just like our CAPAs or NCs timelines, we have a certain percentage that need to meet that timeline because there are exceptional cases where the review is more complicated. So 90 to 95% of the time, those timelines will be met. However, the clock is stopped every time they ask questions or send you requests for additional information. The de novo becomes a little bit more difficult because you have to do a few pre-submissions. And in those pre-submissions, even though they are free of charge, you can get valuable information from the FDA, align with them on requirements for clinical studies and such. And that would increase the timeline for a de novo. But once you submit the de novo with FDA's alignment on your pre-submission information, then after that is pretty straightforward, like a 510K.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, I can add to your point.
Leon.
Yeah, I think we had the same, right, with the organization I work for. They stop the clock, and then in principle it should be 90 days, but we didn't manage to get a clearance done within the timeline that's set for it. So we had to actually withdraw before the end of the whole submission process because of the timelines. So it seems that, and that is excluding the pre-subs, where pre-sub itself can already take 3 months. Once you've done the first pre-sub, then they will come back asking potentially for more data in a second pre-sub or even a third or a fourth pre-sub. So the process can be extremely lengthy, especially for the more complex software devices that use AI. From Europe, what I've seen is that it can vary greatly per notified body. So there are some notified bodies that at this moment guarantee a turnaround time from 4 to 6 weeks, which is super fast. And there are notified bodies where you will be stuck in a review process for more than a year. So it really depends. And for class 1 devices, clearly you self-declare conformity, which is pretty fast in a day.
All right, thank you, everybody, actually, for the input. I hope, Jouke, you're taking notes. So can we move to the third question? And it's about costs. How much would it cost for a company to get a clearance or approval for their medical device?
For the US, look, the fees and the cost of the submissions are generally for larger medtech companies. But if you are a small business, and the threshold for small business is quite high in terms of how much the revenue should be every year, the annual revenue is under a certain high number, you can apply for the discounted rate, and that's preferable for startup companies. So I recommend getting on that during your pre-submission timeline, so that you don't have to wait for that during submissions.
Leon, would you like to comment?
Yeah, sure. I can comment for the EU a bit. So what I learned recently is that one of my customers, they were charged about 50,000 euros to go through the notified body conformity assessment, which for class 2B device using AI. And then another notified body interestingly actually charged a surplus because they make use of AI. And then for a similar type of product, actually lower classification, they charged 100,000 euros, which is, and in both cases, it includes a full 3-year certification period. So it is obtaining the initial certificate, doing your ISO 13485, and getting the MDR certification. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think it varies somewhere in between those lines, where class 3 is probably going to be a little bit more expensive, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a little bit more or much more?
No, it depends, right? And I mean, there's so many variables. One, I just posted the link with notified body fees. You can already see that the hourly fee per notified body is greatly different. And then if you have a class 3 device, the number of auditing days can go up, obviously. But then if you have a large organization, then also the number of days for auditing incrementally increases. So it really, really depends on the size of the organization, the complexity of the product or products, and it's hard to say.
Judith, anything to add on the range, maybe?
No, to be honest, we see so many different amounts coming up, different for different products with different notified bodies. So I really personally haven't been able to distinguish any sense in that or any logics. So no, I would only suggest like go to multiple places and ask for fees, because it can really be worth shopping around a little bit.
All right, thank you. And for the next question, it's from my personal. I want to know from my personal view. We are right now an AI medical IVD, and we are trying to navigate the guidances and regulations or standards that are found in the EU and the US related to AI. I did not find anything in the EU. Also, we got this comment from our own notified bodies. So we are trying to navigate and see what can we do if we have an AI medical device on IVD, and where to get the requirements for our AI in IVD.
Yes.
I don't specifically have a IVD experience. However, I recommend, instead of filing a 513G or any kind of information gathering form with the FDA, I recommend you engage them in a pre-sub and get on the same page with them. And that will be wait. However, you will get valuable information free of charge from the FDA and align you on the path forward. Otherwise, you're going to be surprised if you kind of work in the dark and not seek their guidance early on.
Yeah, I agree. Especially with the FDA, right? It's always good to confirm, have I chosen the right predicate? Have I chosen the right product code? Because if you haven't, then the strategy can vastly differ. As mentioned earlier, right? If you need to go through special controls that are defined, and you didn't do any of the special controls because you selected the incorrect code or the incorrect regulation, you're going to be finding that out during your review with the FDA, and that's going to set you back a long time. And the same with the notified body. I think one of the things that is interesting to note is that in the European Union one, obviously we have the AI Act that's coming up and is going to probably be coming into force somewhere halfway this year. At the same time, within Sentinel, JC21 is developing standards that are going to be supportive of the AI Act. It's worthwhile monitoring what's going to happen with those standards. And in addition thereto, there is NTC 62, which I already mentioned. They're also developing standards specific to medical devices using AI. One of the ones that's coming up is the 24971-2, which is going to be a technical report that's going to be attached to ISO 14971, specifically to guide users on how to use 14971 for AI purposes. And that standard was already published earlier and is now being transposed into ISO. The earlier version is the BSI AMI document, the 34971, that is already available. And there's a bunch of other standards also being developed. So I would say join a standardization organization, join in with the relevant body in your local country, see if there's working groups, and try to obtain the latest information.
Yeah, I think
right,
maybe
thank
to add to that, how it seems now with the upcoming AI Act, it seems as if a additional CE mark is required for that. So if you would have an AI medical device, you would then need two. So differently, like separately from each other, which is also by our office flagged as a huge burden for companies, especially smaller companies. So do keep in mind that it, of course, might still change, but the impact can be really heavy.
And for the last 3 minutes, we have few questions. Maybe we can go through one or two before we say goodbye to everybody. One is, can you use a study data acquired from the EU to apply for FDA approval? Would the FDA accept software that was not validated in US population?
I can take a stab at that, the first one. So we have some recent experience, and Jouke can have a part of that. So the FDA is going to be skeptical when it comes to study data that comes from Europe, partially because the study design is what they want to be involved in for products that don't have a clear predicate. If it's a disruptive, innovative product that is going to change the way, change the current standard of care, which means we're going to go from a manual or a physical device to a software device, that's going to go through a lot of scrutiny. And data from an EU clinical study most likely is not going to be admissible in a way that you can directly submit it. They will ask for some kind of supplement. Now, in cases, I read some of the questions around ethnicities and diversity. The product that we were working on was optical, ophthalmic, so eyes related, so that was not a problem for us. However, in other cases, when there are sensors that are on the skin, for example, for ECG monitoring or for any other sensor that uses your skin color as contrast, you may have to show more diversity and also look at a US population. But overall, not only the clinical data from EU will be looked at skeptically, the real world evidence, if your product is also already commercialized in EU and you want to bring that data and support your submission with that real world data, you're going to have a problem there as well. So yes, there's guidance on real world data and how they can accept it, but FDA's stance usually is, again, pretty skeptical.
Thank you very much. Should we go for a last question, or do you think, all right, so one question was, is there an annual cost for the CE on top of the new submission fee every 5 years? Anybody can answer the question?
I will nominate Leon for this.
Yeah, I assumed.
Sorry, I'm just looking at the question. So the question is if there is an additional, an annual cost for the CE on top of the new submission fee. So I would say you do a submission with a single medical device, for example, then obviously you pay, that is what you've been quoted for a certification cycle, I think of 3 years. So you get one certification audit and then 2, or is it 5 years? I'm not really sure. I think you get 1 or 2 surveillance audits and then again a renewal audit, so it's 3 years. If you add an additional device in between, then obviously they will charge you again with a review price for the device. Any changes that you make that need to be reported will be quoted separately. You also will need to pay for that change assessment.